If you wouldn't mind all taking your seats, please. Thank you. I'm Paul Goodman, editor of ConservativeHome, and let me tell you what's going to happen next. So, in a few moments, I'm going to introduce the Minister for this session. Then I'm going to have a conversation with her for about 20-25 minutes, and then it will be over to you for your questions, and then I will wrap up. So, Minister, it's a pleasure to see you, and this is a sentimental journey, as it must be about 20 years since, as a young member of the Work and Pensions Select Committee, I found myself interrogating Ian McCartney, then the Labour Minister for Pensions. Fond though I grew of him, I have to say I think you and the government are an improvement, but I suppose I would say that, wouldn't I? And I remember when I went on the committee thinking, and it is still true to an enormous extent, that as our discussions today have already proved, these matters of savings and investment and pensions, they may appear a bit dry, but when you pan the camera back, they are extraordinarily fascinating and compelling because they're about the future, about demography, what the world will look like in 10 or 20 years, and how we'll live, not only then but before. So, Laura, welcome. I will not jinx you by reading your speech, which is laid out here in front of me. I will leave that and the extempore bits to you. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Paul. And as you can see, I'm nothing if not prepared. Look, it's a real pleasure to be here today and to follow on from the Economic Secretary to the Treasury, who I know you've heard from this morning. There's been a quiet revolution in pensions over the past 25 years, and almost no one in the general public has noticed. Pensions matter. They matter to us all. Dignity in retirement, the ability to spend your final years how you choose. The state pension is the bedrock of retirement, and that's why the triple lock is so important. But it's always been the case that people topped up their state pension with their occupational pension to help them achieve the retirement that they want. Most people don't engage with their occupational pension. They don't look at it, they don't access it, and there's been remarkably little public debate that under the last Labour government, defined benefit pensions largely fell away in the private sector, becoming almost entirely the preserve of the public sector. Between 1995 and 2010, the number of people who had any pension at all fell by 20%. Generation X's retirement outcomes have been seriously affected by the lack of action by Labour on their pensions. Labour did a good piece of work on the Pension Commission, but that was not matched by any action whatsoever. In fact, the Labour record on pensions was a 25p rise in state pension and a decimation of private pensions. This is simply not good enough for savers. It took the Conservatives, the party of sound money, coming into power in 2010 to change things, with a very honourable mention for Steve Webb, who was an outstanding pensions minister. The introduction of automatic enrolment in 2012 has turned the tide on the number of people saving for their retirement, with over 10.8 million more people saving into a workplace pension, an additional 33 billion invested into pension savings in 2021 compared to 2012. Over that time, the proportion of women saving into a workplace pension has increased from 59% to 91%. And the proportion of eligible 22 to 29-year-olds saving has increased from 35% to 86%. These are phenomenal figures, which emphasise not only the enormous achievements of automatic enrolment, but also expose just how bad things were under the last Labour government. Not only that, but we've introduced pension freedoms, which have given people flexibility and choice over their incomes in retirement, and the funding situation for defined benefit pension schemes has vastly improved since 2010. So we have a proud story to tell on pensions, which will benefit millions of people in retirement, even if not enough people know about it yet. But there's still more to do. Automatic enrolment has brought us greater coverage, but we know that adequacy is not where it should be. The gap between what people used to get in a defined pensions scheme and the current defined contribution pension is too great. And there's too much variation in the returns that people get for their money. This is fundamentally unfair. And people have too many pots and not enough visibility of what their pension is going to look like. It's too unpredictable, and people can't plan. Fixing these issues is at the heart of what I want to achieve as Pensions Minister. Boosting adequacy, increasing fairness, and improving predictability. I'm wholly and unapologetically on the side of the pension saver. So turning to our plan, we are pushing forward on collective defined contributions, or CDC, pension schemes. CDCs pool funds and share risk across members. There's no need for lifestyling towards the end of towards your pension age, and sharing the risk between members over time will allow the scheme to actively target higher investment returns and thus higher pensions. Unlike in DC schemes, CDCs allow members to build up a pension pot and receive a pension in the same scheme. CDCs free members from having to manage their own pots and removes the risks that some people will run out of money in retirement. CDC schemes also play a key role in allowing DC members to turn their pension pot into an income. This is an important innovation in the decumulation market and will give more savers access to improved outcomes that a CDC can offer. That's why I'm committed to working with all of you and everyone in industry to drive this forward. Last year, the legislative framework for CDCs came into force, a landmark moment in the UK pensions market. And I've wasted no time in expanding the provision of CDCs to multi-employer schemes and to master trusts. I want to ensure as many savers as possible can take advantage of the benefits of CDCs, and we're looking at what more we can do to help enable that. But I also want to make sure that the existing stock of DC pensions are working hard for pension savers. Savers deserve confidence that their scheme is being well run on their behalf and delivering fair and predictable outcomes. In January, I published the Value for Money consultation. And when I talk about value for money, I don't just mean low cost. I think that has been the emphasis for too long in the industry. We have to look at returns. Value for money means that savings are invested well. They're not being eroded by high charges, and that schemes are helping members make the right decisions throughout their accumulation period. The proposed framework will increase transparency, comparability, and drive competition across the pensions market. It will help deliver long-term value for hardworking savers, and it proposes giving the regulator the powers they need to tackle underperforming schemes. We are clear that where schemes are not delivering for pension savers, they need to improve, consolidate, or exit the market. We're confident that this will help boost the returns of pension savers, which will help adequacy, as well as helping to drive economic growth, one of the government's top priorities. Good investments are central to well-run pension schemes, and decisions made by trustees have a significant impact on growing savers' pension pot. This spring, I made an important change to the charge cap to allow performance-based fees to be excluded from calculations as an incentive for pension schemes to consider a broader range of investment opportunities, which come with fees but have the potential to generate bigger returns for members. New duties were also placed on trustees to set out their policies in investing in liquid-type assets and their overall asset allocations. Members saving deserve to know that their investments are working as hard as they are. In fact, just 7% of pension schemes in the UK hold alternative assets, compared to an average of 19% amongst their European and North American counterparts. This suggests that we have a long way to go. I really want to see trustees of schemes focusing on ensuring their investment strategies and portfolios are innovative, with effective diversification, and most importantly, are targeting the best net returns for savers. I'm also supporting the Chancellor's ambitions for the UK's pool of long-term capital to be invested productively, benefiting both the companies that drive the UK prosperity and savers. We also need to boost the amount being saved. The 2017 AE review was clear that the next steps for increasing AE contributions would be to reduce the lower earnings limit to ensure contributions are paid from the very first pound of earnings and lower the age of eligibility from 22 to 18. This means that for the very first time, every worker would benefit from employer contributions from the first pound earned. Our analysis shows these changes will benefit over 3 million workers, with 500,000 18 to 21-year-olds built into savings for the very first time. It's my intention to consult, subject to royal assent, on the implementation of these changes in the autumn, and work together with industry, stakeholders, and across government on how and when we make these changes. We're also going to tackle the perpetual issue of automatic enrolment, small pots. Now, the success of automatic enrolment, as I've said, has resulted in record numbers of people saving for their retirement. However, with people increasingly moving within the labour market throughout their working lives, this can make it difficult for them to keep track of what they have saved for retirement. Indeed, research by Scottish Widows has suggested that nearly half of workplace pension holders do not know how many pension pots they hold with previous employers. Part of the solution of this is dashboards, which I'm very much still committed to, and I'm driving forward in the department after the reset. But we also need to deal with the flow of small pots and the existing stock. The consultation on this is now closed, and I'll be saying more of it in the near future, but I will introduce a sustainable system which promotes stability and higher returns to savers. There is a quiet revolution going on in pensions. I'm determined that we will boost returns, and I'm grateful for the support of everyone in this room for our shared mission to give pension savers the retirement that they want and they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I'm going to come straight to a question about the quiet revolution. In the context of a point raised earlier by our sponsor, who I can see in the front row, about the role of consensus. So I'm going to think back about work and pensions policy since I first started having an eye on it. There's the Turner Review. Turner basically says Gordon Brown's complicated the system too much and you need the pension, the state pension, to be in line with earnings. The Treasury does that. In comes the coalition and Steve Webb, who you mentioned. And Steve Webb's ideas are very similar in lots of ways to David Willett's, who is a great thinker about pensions. So David Willits doesn't become the Secretary of State, it's Ian Duncan Smith. He lets Steve Webb get onto it. So my question is about the role of all those three political parties. You know, I've mentioned all three, and although I had my fun, I think rightly in my time, attacking Gordon Brown's over means testing, which you referred to in your remarks, how important is maintaining consensus as a way of maintaining policy? Because if you can't maintain certainty for investors, a measure of certainty in the system, policy will be confused and they won't save and won't know what to do.
I think it's a very insightful point. And actually, I am blessed with, they probably won't thank me for saying this, but my Labour Oppo and SAP Oppo are very good, sensible people who are interested in boosting the returns of pension savers, right? So this is an area where it's possible to have reasonable political debate. We will disagree, but largely there is generally a consensus which forms over these things, which is very important because you're making decisions which will echo through people's lifetimes. Where that broke down recently, which is a huge shame, is over the lifetime allowance. And it's very damaging when that happens because people need a stable investment and they need to know what they're going to get in retirement. Part of what I talked about today is about predictability. And where you don't have that consensus and proper debate, and where people are acting in ways, not to get too party political, but I think that are trying to just make a cheap political point rather than thinking about the longer term, that's when you have a problem in pensions.
Do you think, since you raised the business of the lifetime allowance, I understand what you're getting at, just looking at the other side of the coin, I mean, Jeremy Hunt's taken the lid off. Do you think, in retrospect, really, George Osborne was wrong to reduce it?
I think we're in the right place now, and we've seen that this is something that needs to be fixed. You know, we've got, the government's working really hard. One of the government's priorities is to cut the waiting list. And in order to do that, we need to have the doctors to be able to work in the NHS. And they've said very clearly that this is something that they need to be fixed. We've listened to that, and that's what we are taking forward. It's also obviously slightly absurd to have a different pensions tax rate for some professions and not others. I mean, I don't know then how you start choosing between doctors and police officers and social workers. And
Yeah.
so, you know, we're taking forward a pragmatic solution which fixes an obvious problem. And I think that is the right way to go. And I hope that the other party sees political sense over time.
It was too complicated to fiddle just with one particular group's rates. So it was just decided to cut the Gordian knot and take the lid off the whole thing.
It fixes a problem in a sensible way, which is, and anything else, if you look at all the alternative options, you cannot have personal taxation rates based on your profession. That's absurd.
I'm going to come to private and occupational pensions later. Just for the moment, I'm going to stick with what the state does, because it's a sort of bedrock of the system. I'm just going to keep going for a moment on successes before we come to the problems. So over in France, there are riots because Macron wants to change by, well, I gather it's not an unusual parliamentary means, but it's quite a draconian one. He wants to raise the age at which you receive the pension, I think, from 62 to 64. Riots, people throw things, you know, the French riot police for inaction. Here, successively, it's been raised really without any political trouble at all, as far as I can see. Why is that, and what do you think's happened?
I think it comes back to your earlier point in that pensions is generally a very thought-through, very policy-heavy area, right? You experienced it when you were in Parliament. There's a huge amount of debate about these measures. We have a very good political process, so it goes through, you know, you talked about the Pensions Commission that took place. There was debate in Parliament when Labour raised the retirement age. When there was some changes brought on by the coalition government, that was debated in Parliament. But there has been a large degree of political sensibleness, I think, about these types of changes, which I think has enabled a consensus to form and thus a process by which these things are examined. If you look at what happened recently, you know, we now review the state pension age on a regular basis. The Secretary of State decided that the current legislation was adequate. That will then be looked at again. Everybody knows what's going to happen, why it's happening, the basis on which these decisions are being taken. They're very clearly set out. And that, I think, enables a degree of understanding within the electorate about what is happening and why it's happening.
Okay, so far I've tried to concentrate on what I think is roughly the good news. So now let's turn to the challenges and a stat. So expenditure on state pensions and other benefits set to increase from 5.6% of GDP over the current decade to 9.6% by 2071. And your colleague Miriam Cates wrote for us last week, in just 2 generations' time, there will be 40% fewer births than there are today, and just 2 working age people for every pensioner. So how is the state element of the system, let's stick with that for a moment, going to adapt?
Well, I think it's really important that, as I talked about in my speech, that your state pension is the bedrock of your retirement saving. That has always been the case, it always will be the case. And it's important to give people confidence about that so they can plan their private pensions and what's happening in their occupational pensions. We also saw what happened under Labour, where the state pension wasn't adequate. And all the complex system that you were talking about earlier that was in place previously. What we did in previous years by reforming the state pension was to set it up for the future, to be very clear about what you can expect, what the entitlement is, how you earn your national insurance credits, and also putting pension credit at an adequate level but below the state pension to encourage that culture of national insurance and work over time. So part of what we look at in the regular pensions review is affordability, right? That's a key part of it. It's inevitable that you have to look at that as part of the wider set of things. So that is considered as part of the review. And I think going forward, that is going to have to be looked at in the round. But I think we've taken responsible decisions to date, which means that, yes, public finances are protected, but we're also protecting people in retirement because we know it's really important to give people the dignity and respect in retirement that they deserve.
And some people would say, of course, you're right, it's the bedrock of the system. As you've just said, you have to look at it in the round. And they would say, if you're looking at it in the round, originally, really, you drew the pension after you'd stopped working. And you didn't draw it for very long because, sadly, people died younger. And they'll look at this situation going forward and say, well, hang on, we can't afford to pay so much of the pension while people are still in work, and we can't afford to pay it necessarily at the same rate for so long. So we'd have to sort of bunch it into that period, or the bulk of the money into the period after work, between after work and before people die. I mean, what would you say to that?
So it's always been, I mean, since the Pension Commission in the early noughties, the broad benchmark has been roughly a third of your life spent in retirement. And that's been part of the rationale for moving up the state pension age, to keep that consistent. And I think that is an important principle that has been, again, remained relatively consistent, along with the 10 years notice period that was put in place to make sure that you have a reasonable amount of time, again, to allow you to plan. And these are principles that broadly everyone is signed up to. You know, the exact metric around the third is up to debate. You know, is it 30%, is it 33%? But broadly, that principle of a third is something that everyone is signed up to.
So in fact, governments will have to continue to look at raising the age at which the state pension is received.
Well, it's part of the things that are considered as part of the ongoing review that happens on a regular basis.
And is the triple lock sustainable? Because at least one Conservative Secretary of State in the past has suggested it might not be.
I think that the triple lock is a Conservative innovation. It was a very important innovation. It helped tackle levels of pensioner poverty. We've got 200,000 fewer pensioners in absolute poverty than when we came in 2010. That's something I think that we as Conservatives should be very, very proud of. In terms of the future of the triple lock, we're very much committed to it throughout this Parliament. And I think other decisions are a matter above my pay grade.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I won't push you any further. The fact you can't make a further commitment is itself interesting. Clearly, with this ageing population and with the age at which you receive the state pension, may have to change. Triple lock may have to change. We don't really know. There's a question that hangs in the air, which is the answer to this challenge going forward that we should be saving more now, in which case there's a hit to consumption and our economy is very heavily consumption-based? Or should we really be trying to get more out of what our private and occupational pensions do in retirement? Where's the balance lie?
Well, what I talked about in my speech is trying to emphasise both. So absolutely, we need people's pensions to be working harder for them. The variation in what people get in terms of the returns is enormous, and nobody knows about it, right? Like, you all know, sitting here, that the 1% difference in returns can be a monumental difference in terms of the retirement that you're actually going to get at the end. But most people don't know that. Most people don't look at their pensions. So what we're trying to do is, through the value for money framework, kind of squeeze the outliers to make sure that the returns that savers are getting are boosted up. And there is that more of an emphasis on returns rather than costs, because that is going to make the big difference to your retirement income. But in terms of more money going in, as I mentioned, the 27 automatic enrolment review talked about reducing the lower earnings limit and reducing the age down. And that's how, the first step to getting more into people's automatic enrolment pension.
And I was talking earlier to Jerry Lyons, who's here, I think, at the back. He was kind enough to, there he is. He was kind enough to quote me during his question, so I'm going to quote him. We were having a discussion earlier about pension funds, and he said, well, the proportion of money that pension funds are investing here in the UK, it really isn't sufficient, and I can think of developments and projects here where they've been unable to find money here, but money's been coming from abroad. What more can be done to get pension funds here to invest in British industries, in particular in kind of success stories like life sciences?
Well, I'm lucky enough to have Gerard as one of my constituents, and I know him very well. And he is, as ever, very sensible on many things, and this in particular. It's very much a focus of the Chancellor to try and get more money invested in the UK in productive finance assets. The thing, and that's absolutely right, I see my role as a real advocate for the pension saver. I am fighting on behalf of pension savers across this country to try and get them better returns and better retirements. And so, for me, the issue is about higher returns. Typically, investment in illiquid assets will give you higher returns. We're underinvested in illiquid assets here compared to other countries. I would like to see that increase because I want pensions to increase in retirement, and that's the lens through which I look at it.
And as someone with the interests of savers in mind, you'll be aware of its current debate that's very live, which is some people say we really ought to be able to invest DC contributions more widely. In other words, there's a kind of risk-reward trade-off, and some people are very much on the side of risk. We just had a whole discussion about risk with Andrew Griffiths earlier. But if you talk to a pension trustee, I imagine they would say, oh, hang on a moment, we have our fiduciary duties, and they're within a framework, Minister, that you have laid out. If we're going to be encouraged to take risk, we're not sure we should be, but if we are, you have to change the framework. So where does the balance lie here?
Well, I'm conscious, I think I've got the head of the Trustee Association here who will be able to talk to us in some detail about this later. But I think the point about the fiduciary responsibility is that it is acting in the best interest of pension savers. And I think what we need to do as a government is to remove barriers to investment in illiquids. Like, for example, we removed some performance fees for investment in illiquids. I did that earlier on this year. Which is something which was getting in the way of investing in things which would have a higher return for savers. So I think there are things that we can do as government to make this easier, whilst at the same time they're recognising that investment decisions sit with trustees.
What more can you do to ensure that the consumer or the person who holds the pension is better informed? Because the theme of the discussion today has been people moving from one job to the other, not knowing how much is in their fund, not even knowing how many pensions they have, not always taking them with them. What can you do about that?
Well, we just closed a consultation, which many people here in this room, I'm sure, have taken part in, which is about small pots, about what you do about the fact that you've got lots of these very small pots sitting in various pension schemes, not really being productive for the saver. So we're going to have more to say about that in due course. The consultation response will hopefully be coming out before the summer. But there's also dashboards. We're developing dashboards. It's not been without hitches, but we're getting there with it, and we're hoping that that will be live, in the near future, and that will allow people to look at all of their pension pots in one place and see what kind of retirement income that will.
So just curious, what are the hitches, by the way, you refer to? This is a government IT thing?
I did a reset of the programme earlier this year, which, and we're in the process of looking at how it's going to work and the time frame over which it's going to be delivered. And again, I'm going to be coming back before the summer on that.
OK, look, let's have some questions. And I see two immediately at the front. I'll start with Ed and then go to James. So, Ed. Anthony, I'm so sorry. So sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, Anthony McKenna from...
Try again. We'll try again and we'll find out.
Thank you.
Oh, yes, yes, it definitely is. I'd say it's on. Yep.
Anthony McKenna from Bedfordshire. My question is, when an individual in the labour market moves from one employer to a new employer, they will have a pension account with the previous workplace pension provider of their last employer. When they want to codify their previous pension within their new pension provider, what penalties could the previous pension provider face if there is a delay in that transfer in accordance with service level agreement? And furthermore, what is your department doing in regards to underperforming workplace pension trust providers? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'll tackle the second bit first. So underperforming pension providers, we're going to be looking at as part of the value for money scheme. So the whole idea, and which picks up actually on the second bit of your question as well, because what we're trying to do is to make sure that pension schemes are assessed on the returns that they are providing for individual pension savers, but also the level of service. That's really important. It's part of it. We're consulting on it at the moment, so we're going to come back with more detail before the summer. But those two things are an intrinsic part of what you want from your pension scheme, right? And because we know that people aren't really engaged with their pension, some people are, which is fabulous, most people aren't. So we need to make sure that behind the scenes, we are ensuring that they are delivering high returns and that also the service they're getting is very good. We are also looking at the transfer provision, whether it's as smooth and as seamless as it could be. And that's work that's going on at the moment.
James.
James Kirkup from the Social Market Foundation. Can I ask you a question about Canada?
Please.
Because you talked about wanting bigger, more ambitious long-term pension funds that can allocate more capital to long-term productive use. And the Canadians have, over the last 20-something years, very successfully built some very big, relatively low-cost, high-yield, public sector-based pension funds that are able to put money, including into investments, including some in the UK, where I think by implication you'd quite like British money to go instead. So I'm just wondering what lessons you and the department have drawn from that. Is there scope for the development of Canadian-style pension funds in the UK, particularly drawing on our, our local government pension sector, where we have lots of little disparate pensions and none of that size and scale and consolidation? So are there Canadian lessons to be drawn for the future of pensions in the UK?
As ever, James, you've hit on a lot of things that we are looking at the moment. I mean, it is Canada, Australia, Netherlands, really interesting places with a lot of things going on. And I think, as a general rule in policy development, we should always look abroad at what's happened, learn the lessons over there, make sure that we are looking at the good things, but also learning from the mistakes as well. And I think Canada does have a very high proportion invested in liquids that is, leading to higher returns, which I think is important. That ditto the case for Australia as well. We do have quite a high amount of consolidation in the industry at the moment. We've got a very long tail, but we do have quite a high amount of consolidation. But there could always be more, and I think that having clear investment vehicles by which people can invest into illiquids is also really important. So the short answer is yes, it is very interesting. Yes, we are looking at it, and yes, there are things I think we could learn.
Okay, who wants to? Yeah, there.
Thank you. Good morning, Minister. Ben Stafford from Just Group. It's tremendously positive to hear your agenda and hear that you're going to be an advocate for savers. There's one part that I hope I could ask you about, which is just as important. The accumulation element's important, but so too is access. Paul described, and I think you've acknowledged yourself, the problems with disengagement. Tremendous achievements with workplace pension participation, but it's not matched with engagement. We know from our engagement within industry that schemes are concerned about their members at the point of access, because often they don't get the support and they don't use the good stuff even when it's there. Some will go to the likes of great firms like Hargreaves Lansdown, others might go to guidance. Most do neither. And the schemes are keen to see options trialled to try and change that, including auto-appointment. We've got at least 6 large UK pension schemes that are keen to support a trial to see what would happen if you auto-book people into pensioners guidance rather than thinking that they will go themselves, in particular because they view the stronger nudges coming too late to be effective. So my question is, would you be willing to meet with these schemes to hear their arguments and hear the case for how a trial could be carried out?
So we had a bit of a chat about this previously. I do think it's really important that people get the guidance that they need. I do think we need to allow a stronger nudge to work, but absolutely, I'm always open to any ideas in this space, because it's important that we have innovation and it's important that we're trying to get people what they need. I also think there's a role for defaults a little bit more. I think it's quite interesting in terms of where we are at the moment, because we have a default in an accumulation, but not in decumulation. I do think that's slightly anomalous, so that is something that I want to do some more work on, which would also speak to some of the problems that you described.
Right, who's next? Yeah, the lady there.
Is this? Oh, yeah.
Yes, it is.
Hi, I'm Lily Megson from My Pension Expert, and in addition to guidance, obviously independent financial advice would also help the engagement issue and help people to achieve the retirement they want. So I just wondered what the government's position was on the retirement finance market as a whole, and what the government feels that they and the industry should be doing to improve affordable independent financial advice to people of all wealth brackets and of all backgrounds.
You've just had the Economic Secretary to the Treasury, and this is slightly more his... he's a great man, and we work very closely together, but our portfolios are slightly different pension-wise, and that type of guidance is very much me. But kind of the broader financial advice area is not mine, that's more Andrew's. So I shouldn't tread on his toes other than to say, yes, I think it's very important, and yes, it's important that people get advice.
Who's next? Anyone? No one? Yes, our sponsor.
So, Chris Hill, Hargreaves Lansdowne. My question is about a lifetime pension. Because what we've heard in the conversation so far is engagement's really important, absolutely. I think if I had to look at people who are saving and investing successfully for their pension, there'd be two characteristics. One would be engagement, the other one would be confidence. And confidence doesn't mean that you're Soros or Buffett or anyone like that. It means you understand what you're doing and you understand where and how you can go get help. And auto-enrollment has been amazing in terms of getting people to participate, but it hasn't been great getting people engaged. And I wonder what your thoughts were. I understand there's a bill being looked at for a lifetime pension, which would mean that people could opt to have their pension paid into the pension of their choice, which, to your point around consolidation, would obviously achieve that straight away. But also, it would put the onus on pension providers to put a lot more emphasis on communication and engagement, which would serve to build confidence with their savers of the future. And I wondered what your thoughts were, Minister.
Well, thank you for the question. And as you say, we've got a consultation on this at the moment. So I hear what you had to say. I'm limited in what I can say in response. What I would point out, though, is that I would love everybody to be engaged in their pension. That would be a joy. But the majority of people, that probably is not going to happen. Right? I have to be realistic about that, and I need to make sure I'm protecting those people, which is why I think the role of defaults has to have more of a role than it has previously. And I think that making it simpler for people is definitely the way forward. So to your view around making sure that we don't have a situation where people end up with 11 pots at when they come to retirement, that definitely would be, I think, an improvement and make it easier for people to engage with their pension. So lots of live issues, and absolutely hear what you have to say.
Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Peter Zinkin. There's been a number of cases recently of significant data protection issues associated with pension funds. And the response of those involved, the regulator, and to some extent the government, has been perceived by many as being a little slow. Now, this is not good for confidence of people, particularly in the context of all the other discussions that we've been having about the need to aggregate pots and for people to be proactive. So what do you think that you can do to support the industry in the context of the ever more aggressive attacks on data?
It's an incredibly important issue, and it's one that we need to be alive to throughout all our policy development. I hear what you have to say. I mean, the pensions regulator, as you know, are responsible for kind of overseeing this. I know there have been instances recently, and I appreciate the feedback. I will take it back to them, and but I think, you know, be reassured that at the heart of everything that we do as a department, data security is at the heart, because, as you say, if you don't have confidence in something like dashboards, if you don't have confidence that your data is secure, then people aren't going to use it. And so it's certainly, for everything that we've been doing, it's been the heart of design, but I take the feedback on the broader response.
Anyone else? I have a question about what it's been like being the pensions minister. You've now done it for about 6 months. Yeah. Just in the course of that time, I was having a look through Hansard this morning. How many general debates on pensions have you had to answer?
Well, it was quite interesting because my first week I had questions and an opposition debate, which was quite interesting for a first week in the job. But you know, baptism of fire and all that. So we regularly come to the House. I've had a lot of secondary legislation, so yeah. I'd say, but in terms of general debates, I think we've had 2. in that time.
Can you remember what the opposition day debate was on?
It was on the state pension age.
It was on the state pension age. Because I was looking at the questions, and quite a lot of the questions from Labour MPs is also fair enough, has been inevitably, and it's not a bad thing to do if you're an opposition MP. You're raising the cases of individual constituents who have troubles, that's fine. But the Commons doesn't seem to have a lot of general debate about pensions policy, is that right? Do you think that would be fair?
It's more done with secondary legislation, I'd say, more than... well, we've not had a pensions bill going through. I think it would be very different if we had a pensions bill going through, a piece of primary ledge. We've been mainly doing secondary legislation, and they've just done the one opposition day debate on this.
What was it like coming in as a minister? Because you'd been a PPS at Transport. I think you'd resigned, like rather a large number of other ministers, last year after all those events that we remember. And then Rishi Sunak comes in, he becomes Prime Minister, he makes you Under Secretary of State for Pensions. What was it like going into the department, and what's the first thing that happens when they sit you down?
Well, as you'll know, pensions is rather technical. So being taught through the intricacies of guaranteed minimum pensions and other things was quite the joy. But I think it is... I love this job because it touches everybody, right? Like, everybody in the country. It is really important for the long-term future. There's some proper policy decisions that you need to grapple with. We've talked about a lot of them today. And as someone, who has a policy background, this is fantastic. It's also an area where everybody's pretty positive, actually. Like, there is a positive debate about pensions. Everybody is trying to do the right thing, help people's retirement outcomes, and it is a nice environment to be in where everyone is, not tearing chunks out of each other, but just trying to genuinely be quite constructive, I found, in general.
And talking of being constructive, there's a lot of stuff around in the media you may have noticed about relations between ministers and civil servants. How have you found the civil service? My
civil servants are outstanding. It's also interesting, I think, because of the nature of pensions, a lot of them have been there for a very long period of time, which is really something. I mean, I think we've got quite a few people working past their retirement age who've been there for kind of like 30 years or so. I've worked with the civil service for a long time. I was a special advisor before doing this. So I started being a special advisor in 2010. So long time. And I have nothing but respect and admiration for the work that the civil service does. And I think we've got a brilliant team at DWP and an excellent permanent secretary.
The people who've been there for a long time, are they in general on the policy side?
Yes.
That's interesting because one of the, this is not related to all the current controversies, but one of the back and forths about the civil service is that the policy side in all departments isn't always very well developed. But clearly you feel yours is an exception.
Yes, and it is... to be fair, it is different to what I've seen in other departments in terms of the length of time, and but it's impossible to move in and out of pensions very, very quickly. You do need the kind of deep, from a policy official perspective, you need the deep understanding, and they've definitely got it. I really do have some excellent officials.
Anyone else, or else we'll wrap up? Yes, no. James, you've got. Yes, go ahead. Of course you can. Yeah.
Sorry, it was on adequacy. And it ties little to the questions Paul's just been raising with you about the political attention, I suppose. In your speech, you talked about the lack of pensions adequacy and the need to get more money going into pensions. I'm just wondering who you think is going to say that to the public. Will we ever get a position where politicians stand up and say to the public, you are not saving enough, you need to put more money aside for a rainy day? Or will it be left to the industry and others?
But we're doing that for them to an extent. So the 2017 automatic enrolment review was about reducing the lower earnings limit, right, which will mean that everyone will pay more into their pensions and everyone will start paying earlier. Right, those will be two significant things, and I think that was the general consensus around what the next steps were going to be. And that is something that we have now pushed forward with and will make a massive difference, I think, to people's pensions. It's not the extent of where we need to get to, but it's important with pensions that you do things together, you take people with you, and that is a step that I think everybody agrees on. And then in addition, we need to do all things about boosting the actual returns that people get so that the actual amount is higher when they get to retirement.
Laura, thank you very much. Is that it? In which case, I'd like to thank you. It's obviously quite late in the Parliament. It's very good to see a minister who comes along is really enthusiastic about getting to grips with their brief, and is trying to balance two things. One is moving things along, and the other is maintaining the consensus in the system that allows things to be moved along. So it's been fascinating to watch. So thank you. I'd like to thank Chris and our sponsors for making this event possible today. It's been great working with you. And while I'm on my thanks, I want to thank all our panelists, our ConHome columnists like Emily and Jerry Lyons, who's there, Angus and Mark Wallace and Sarah and Abigail from the ConHome team, and James, and above all of you for coming today and helping to make this event a success. Thank you all very much.